Winter arrived quietly in Montana. The fields around the farmhouse disappeared beneath fresh snow, and every morning thin smoke curled from the chimney while golden light glowed through the kitchen windows. But the old barn no longer felt abandoned. Now, it breathed. The sharp scent of cedar and walnut filled the air. Freshly built tables stood beside half-finished rocking chairs, and the steady sound of sanding echoed across the property from sunrise until dark. Business had exploded faster than Ethan ever imagined. Customers drove from neighboring counties just to visit the workshop. A local store in Billings had started displaying his furniture in the front window. One handmade dining table sold for more money than Ethan used to make in 2 months. For the first time in years, life finally felt stable. And that scared him more than failure ever had. Because deep down, Ethan still wasn't used to keeping good things. One icy evening, Ethan carried firewood toward the porch when headlights appeared at the end of the driveway. A black SUV rolled slowly through the snow. Margaret looked up from her rocking chair. Her expression immediately hardened. Harold. Ethan's grip tightened on the wood. The SUV stopped beside the barn. Harold stepped out wearing an expensive coat and leather gloves, the kind of clothes that looked completely out of place on a farm. He glanced around the property carefully, at the repaired fences, the cleared pathways, the warm light inside the workshop. Then his eyes landed on Ethan. "Well," he said with a thin smile, "looks like the drifter finally settled in." Margaret stood slowly. "What do you want?" Harold ignored her question and walked toward the barn instead. Inside, he examined the furniture lined against the walls. His expression changed slightly. Not admiration, calculation. "How much are these selling for?" he asked casually. Ethan stayed quiet. Harold smirked. "That much, huh?" Margaret stepped beside Ethan. "You didn't come here to compliment woodworking." "No," Harold admitted. "I came because developers from Denver are buying land all across this county." He turned slowly. "And they're very interested in this property." Margaret folded her arms. "We already discussed this. That was before this place became valuable." Harold removed a folded paper from his coat pocket and handed it toward her. "A formal offer." Margaret didn't even look at it. "I'm not selling." Harold sighed dramatically. "You're being emotional again. And you're being greedy again." His jaw tightened. "You can barely maintain this place." Ethan finally spoke. "She's doing just fine." Harold's eyes shifted toward him instantly. "No," he said coldly. "She isn't." Then he pointed around the workshop. "This success, it's temporary. One bad season and everything collapses." Ethan took a step closer. "We'll take our chances." For a moment, silence filled the barn. Only the sound of wind pushing against the old walls remained. Then Harold smiled again. But this time the smile felt dangerous. "You know," he said softly, "I used to wonder why Margaret let a complete stranger stay here." His eyes narrowed slightly. "But now I get it." Margaret's voice turned sharp. "Enough." Harold ignored her. "You needed a home." He looked directly at Ethan. "And she needed someone to replace what she lost." The words hit harder than Ethan expected. Margaret looked furious. "Get out." Harold shrugged. Truth usually makes people angry. Then he walked out into the snow. The SUV disappeared down the road moments later. But the silence he left behind stayed much longer. That night, dinner felt unusually quiet. The soup grew cold between them. Finally, Ethan spoke carefully. "Maybe I should leave for a while." Margaret looked up instantly. "No, he's not completely wrong." "He's completely wrong." Ethan rubbed his hands together nervously. "I don't want people thinking I'm here because I want something." Margaret stared at him for several seconds. Then she said something that made his chest tighten. "You know what the difference is between you and Harold?" Ethan shook his head. "One man only sees what this place is worth." Her eyes softened slightly. The other sees what it means. Ethan looked away, because no one had ever said something like that to him before. 3 nights later, the worst blizzard of the winter hit the county. The storm arrived without warning. Winds screamed across the fields hard enough to shake the windows. Snow buried the roads within hours, and power lines snapped somewhere near town. By midnight, the farmhouse went completely dark. Ethan quickly lit oil lanterns while Margaret added wood to the stove. "You okay?" he asked. "I've survived 68 Montana winters," she replied calmly. "I think I'll survive one more." But around 2 in the morning, Ethan woke to a loud crash downstairs. He rushed from his room. Margaret. He found her collapsed beside the staircase. Panic slammed through him instantly. He dropped to his knees. Hey, look at me." Her breathing was shallow. "I'm fine," she whispered weakly. "No, you're not." The roads were impossible to drive. Bones barely worked. The storm outside sounded violent enough to tear the roof away. Ethan carried her carefully to the couch near the fire. He stayed beside her the entire night, feeding the stove, checking her breathing, holding a lantern while snow battered the windows. At one point, Margaret opened her eyes slightly. "You should sleep," she whispered. "I'm not leaving you alone." A faint smile touched her lips. "That sounds exactly like him." "Your husband?" She nodded weakly. "He also acted tough when he cared about someone." Ethan looked toward the fire quietly. Outside, the storm raged harder. But inside that farmhouse, for the first time in many years, he realized something terrified him more than losing money or failing again. Losing her. Morning finally came. Emergency crews reached the property shortly after sunrise. The doctor later explained it was exhaustion, stress, and dangerously high blood pressure, not a heart attack. But the scare changed something inside Ethan permanently, because the thought of this house becoming empty again suddenly felt unbearable. A week later, Margaret called Ethan into the kitchen. An old metal box rested on the table. "What's this?" he asked. "Open it." Inside were property papers. Ethan frowned while reading them. Then his face changed completely. His name had been added beside hers on the deed. He looked up immediately. "No." Margaret stayed calm. "It's already done. You can't just give me half your farm." "I can," she replied softly. "And I did." Ethan pushed the papers back toward her. "I don't deserve this." Margaret smiled sadly. "Ethan, do you know what my husband used to say?" He stayed silent. "He said the strongest families are usually the ones life builds unexpectedly." The room went quiet. Tears burned behind Ethan's eyes. Nobody had chosen him in a very long time. Not truly. Margaret reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You stopped being a guest months ago." That evening, Ethan went to the barn alone. Snow fell softly outside while warm light spilled across the workshop floor. He moved old storage crates near the back wall, trying to clear space for new equipment. Then suddenly, thunk. His boot hit something hollow beneath the floorboards. Ethan frowned. He knelt down slowly and pulled at the loose wooden plank. Underneath sat a small rusted tin box covered in dust. His heartbeat slowed. Carefully, he lifted it out. Inside were dozens of old photographs, faded receipts, military medals, and one sealed envelope. Written across the front were 4 words. "For whoever stays." Ethan froze. Slowly, he opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter from Margaret's late husband. The paper trembled slightly in Ethan's hands as he read.